as the project goes, as the code base increases, gains more features, it's harder and harder to test. Regression testing gets longer and longer, right? So we'll discuss that a little later. So what would I recommend if to make your sprints less of checkpoints? You have to define your definition of done, all right, and make sure that definition of done gets met at the end of the sprint, all right. So there are many ways to define definition of done, but usually it involves some level of testing, some level of at least review by some stakeholders, all right. And you can't really get good feedback if you can't put it in the hands of stakeholders to play around with. So the inspect and adapt principle of Scrum, if you can't build a stable increment there, you compromise inspect and adapt. Okay? Silence. All right. Okay, let's move on to something else. User stories are not requirements. That's what I spoke on last SOFTCON. I had a full hour just saying user stories aren't requirements. Okay. Mike Cohn says it's just a pointer to a requirement. It's just a way to start a conversation rather than a requirement itself. So a user story, a story is basically just a conversation starter. They're not a requirement. It's just, okay, we haven't fleshed out this requirement, but we need to define the problem. Okay, so we need a way to start the conversation between business and dev. All right. So user story allows the product owner or some other business stakeholder to describe a problem in a way that both parties can understand and discuss. Right? So this is not a user story. It could drive me crazy when I see requirements like this. As a user, I want to create, read, update, delete something. And I see, it's an entire page of whatever I want to create, read, update, delete. They're trying to use, they're so used to having templates and formats that they say, oh, a user story, it's another template, let me apply it right away, without really understanding. It's just a way to start a conversation between dev and business. So don't use them to describe requirements. You can keep them, although originally Kent Beck would prefer to throw them away. But you can keep them to remember the discussion. But they're not the requirement. They're just a starting point for the discussion. All right. You don't need user stories if you already understand the problem and you can go straight to the solution. You don't need user stories. The user story starts the discussion of, help us understand the problem so that we build the right solution. So a proper user story, so this doesn't even follow any format out there, but it talks about a problem in a way that both dev and business can understand. Okay, so this is a user story. Again, if you already know the problem, you can go straight to solutioning. You don't need a user story. But a user story helps both sides start discussing the solution because they start to understand. Helps both sides discuss the problem first and then come up with a solution that's appropriate. Okay. So user stories are a waste of time if the solution is already known. Both sides already understand the problem. Okay, so what is our template? Everybody's looking for a template. All right, you can go back to whatever template you used to have, for example. If you go back to XP, and user stories anyway are not Scrum, they're XP. Go up and down the Scrum grind, there's nothing there that talks about user stories. So extreme programming would recommend that acceptance criteria or even acceptance tests are the best way to define requirements, right? And then we can discuss that more. It'll take a long time. Offline, we can discuss that. Feature-driven development would define a feature as action plus result plus object. So something like this: add a student to a seminar waiting list, or calculate the average mark on a transcript. We found that wireframes are very useful, and then from the wireframe, sticking the acceptance criteria, writing on the wireframe the acceptance criteria on the wireframe itself or under the wireframe has been very useful for us to describe requirements. You can go back to use cases, the IEEE format, others, with some very formal organizations, we turn to more formal documentation. So Scrum doesn't really say how you should do it, but a lot of organizations, we can have a conversation on what's worked for us and other organizations. But user stories are requirements. Okay. And then another is punishing and rewarding for velocity or sprint backlog completion. Does anybody work for an organization that does this? When you complete the sprint backlog, you have bonus points or something. But if your velocity goes down, you get a memo. I don't know, something like that. Right? What's the point of velocity? The velocity is just so that you can forecast how much work you can take in, so that you can properly guide the product owner on what can be accepted in the sprint. If the management of the organization starts to put incentives or punishments in velocity or sprint backlog completion, then you're just encouraging people to game the system. Okay, we get a bonus if at the end of the year we're always consistently meeting our sprint backlog commitments. Then let's make sure we always undercommit, right? We can still do that, right? That's not good for the organization. The organization becomes less competitive. So the velocity is just supposed to be a forecast. The sprint backlog, again, is also a forecast of what can be completed. It's all right if you miss it. It's all right if at the end of the sprint, of course, in the middle of the sprint, you should tell the product owner, hey, we won't be able to finish everything. But it's all right if some sprints you're not able to finish everything. In fact, it's a good sign because it means you're not sandbagging. The team is really honestly trying to provide realistic forecasts and estimates of what they can accomplish in a sprint.